Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Guy Widge, who's a psychologist and author. His latest book is Mind Over Grind: How to Break Free When Work Hijacks Your Life. I suspect this hits home for a lot of folks. Welcome, Guy.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So this was when I saw the title, I was fascinated, and I read your background, and there was a lot going on here. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about your career and why you're writing these books? You have a few other ones, but this one seems particularly pertinent right now when people are kind of panicking about AI and trying to figure out what the next decade or two looks like.
Yeah, right. I mean, the workplace has been shifting a lot lately. Over the pandemic, we had this kind of golden moment of emotional health in the workplace because everyone was concerned because of the shutdowns. And so, all these companies put programs in place and, spoke about work-life balance. But at the same time, work stress and burnout kept going up. And now we have AI introducing massive insecurity in so many sectors. And so there's just a general feeling of dread in the workplace. And I wrote the book because that feeling of dread is not helping us at work. It's not helping us at home. And it's kind of allowing work to take over our lives in all kinds of ways in which it's not benefiting us.
So how is this different from the standard feeling of, oh, I got to be on my email all day, that kind of thing? I suspect you're coming at this from a completely different angle where this is actually detrimental to us.
It's very detrimental. Dread, first of all, is a very, very difficult feeling for us to sustain. There are a lot of experiments in which people are given the option, for example, to receive a mild electrical shock later or a heavier one, a sharper electrical shock now. And the anticipation of having to wait for the mild one is so difficult that people always choose, not always, but most people choose to get the worst shock now just because dread is such an intolerable feeling. And when you have uncertainty because of AI, because of grind culture, because of mass cuts that we keep seeing in the news all the time, it introduces an acute stressor into whatever already is going on in your workplace. And we don't manage that well, and we mismanage it. And how we mismanage it, we actually make all the grind worse for ourselves. We make stress worse, both at home and at work, because we don't catch psychologically what's happening to us. So we need to get more sophisticated about how we're mismanaging stress so we can avoid falling into these traps.
I feel like it would be helpful if you gave us sort of an example, maybe one of your patients or someone that you've spoken to who was in sort of like this dread mode when it came to work. Because I mean, a lot of people don't want to wake up, right? They don't want to go, they don't want to log in. But it sounds like we're also talking about something.
Yeah, look, so first of all, I use myself as an example a lot in the book because I've struggled with all these things. But here are a couple of quick examples. If you dread going to work, and if you wake up in the morning with this heaviness, like, oh, I have to slog through another day now, there are a few ramifications from that. Number one, it means that when you get home from work, you're unlikely to not think about work. You're probably going to be thinking about work, processing the day, dreading the next day. All of that kind of rumination, that obsessive kind of thinking is unproductive. It's unpaid overtime, and you're going to spend hours stressing yourself out and keeping yourself in this bad emotional space at home when that's when you should be recovering from the workday. That's when the work-life part of the work-life balance happens. You're not going to be present in the life part because you're going to be so preoccupied and worried, upset, whatever the thing is about your job. And that happens in the form of intrusive thoughts. It's not that you want to sit home and I want to brood all evening. No one does that. But the brooding happens, and unless you know how to tackle it, how to undo that, you're going to spend hours brooding in that way, stressing yourself out in that way. And when you do, you're going to sleep more poorly, which is going to make you more susceptible to stress the next day. And that's going to play out. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to conflict with your partner, with your family at home, because you're going to be checked out. You're not going to be present. You're not going to do your duties well. And that creates conflict at home, which again will increase the stress and make you more prone the next morning. And the other thing you're going to do is you're going to start to cut off those parts of yourself that used to feel like fun, enjoyable activities you used to do, interests you used to have, friends you used to have. Because when we're in that mode of feeling dread, of feeling just like the grind of it all, we don't feel like doing anything. And then we slowly lose parts of ourselves over time. There are more examples, but these are just a few of the ways we mismanage that kind of stress. We get overwhelmed by it. by the uncertainty of it, and it just sets us up to fail all over the place.
So before we go into some of the remedies, or even just maybe some positive thoughts on this, what happens when the workplace is when it's my company, when it's my business? Is that different? Is there anything that's particularly different in that situation?
Look, I'm self-employed. I've always been. I talked about myself in the book because actually, when you're self-employed, when you own a small business, when you're the founder of the startup, there's so much responsibility on you, and especially if you feel driven, if you feel motivated, if you're somebody who wants to succeed, then it's a very slippery slope because there are no limits set on you by an external force. And so you can just keep driving and keep grinding and keep trying to do more. And there's more opportunity and I have to try and get there. You can lose sight of things even more because this pressure is all self-imposed.
Now when we have AI, it's almost as if all of that work that what we thought we needed to do constantly, which we could equate to busy work, but it's not busy work. It's just sort of like the small things that we would normally do during the day: pay an invoice, do all the send an email, that kind of thing. Even like draft a memo, we have AI could do that. Is that affecting us at all? Is that reducing some of the stress, or is it increasing it?
It's a double-edged sword, right? Because you have agents that can do some of these things for you, or you can use some of the large language models to draft the email more quickly or to do this more quickly. But for most people, there's more they can always do. And so it's not as if that frees you up and you decide, therefore, I'm going to take half the day off, or now I'm going to go for a 2-hour nice walk on the beach because I got AI to write the email. That's not how it works. We just fill in the time with something else. And AI on the bad side is a huge stressor because it starts with doing your emails and setting up appointments for you. It could end up by taking your job or making your job less important or more competitive. And so it's very unclear in many, many industries, including my own. I'm a psychologist and a writer. Both of those things are threatened species in the age of AI, as it is. Half the people I work with talk to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is whenever I'm out for a week. They're like, it's okay. We spoke to AI, or they'll say to me like, "Oh, it's interesting you say that. AI agrees with you," and I'm like, "Oh, it does. That's very nice. That agrees with me." But it's and again, it can say some wise things, it can say some stupid things, it can mislead, but this is where we are now, and we don't know where we're going. So the threat of that, the fact that we don't know our relevance in 5 or 10 years' time, or certainly less, probably, is a big source of angst.
As a psychologist, this is a question I have. So I've seen a lot of folks almost going into psychosis when it comes to AI. You say your coworkers or somebody you're working with comes back and says, "Oh, ChatGPT said this. It agrees with you," that sort of thing. But I'm seeing folks who are saying, "Well, I have these 4 agents that I know and I love, and I work with them on a daily basis, and they're my friends." And are we bringing out something dangerous in the human psyche because we have these sort of like these homunculi that we can just deal with on a daily basis?
Look, I mean, we can feel attached to some of our agents. I don't know if you've had a chance to dip into Maltbook, but it's like an interesting place to see what they're talking about, what the agents are talking about, as it were. But you can feel attached. But if you're feeling attached to your agents, then I would say that you're feeling not sufficiently attached to the people around you. Because it's when you are too immersed in work that you can detach and feel emotionally detached from your partner if you have one, or feel less motivated to go up and socialize and have friends around you or have romantic prospects around you because you're so devoted and committed to work and because that's taking up so much of your bandwidth. But then, you might feel more attached to agents or in that kind of way. But to me, that's a problematic sign. That's not where your attachments should be forming emotionally. And if they're forming there, then they're problematic somewhere else.
Is there any research going into this, or are psychologists or researachers starting to
There's
look
a lot
into
of
this sort of
research, yes, starting to, but the way research works is it takes a year or two to actually do the research, then it takes a year or two to get it published. So there's a bit of a lag going on between, you can see surveys, but that doesn't really get into the depths of things. It just characterizes people in large groups about, people are saying this. But if you actually want to look into the depths of it, I hope we'll see a lot more research coming out in the next couple of years. But right now, a lot of it is still being done.
Okay. So we went down the dark path. Now let's try to get to the sunny side of the street. How do we break out of this?
So one thing you have to understand is that I'm a very practical person. The tools and techniques I talk about in the book are very practical things that you need to apply to each situation. So, for example, if you're obsessing and ruminating about work, after work, if you get these intrusive thoughts about the argument you had with a coworker or the difficult client that you dealt with, and you're just stewing on that, all evening, you have to turn that into a problem that can be solved, because your brain is going to latch onto uncertainty and just repeating the difficult emotion and the difficult scenario. You need to calm your brain down by saying, all right, but what am I going to do about it? What's the action item? Do I need to have a conversation with my coworker who I had the argument in? Do I need to set limits with them? Do I need to address the client in a certain way? And it's not just, do I need to do that? You need to figure out if yes or no. If yes, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? And then you work backwards in terms of how to attain it. You literally figure it out. Take the 15, 20 minutes to sit down, figure it out. And once you've figured out a plan of action, even if it's not complete, but okay, I'm going to do this and this and this, and I'll then figure it out the rest of it tomorrow, that should be enough for you to then, for your brain to stop bombarding you with these worried thoughts about that event, because you've figured something out. So your brain actually, lets go in that moment. But you have to do that with each of the things that you're stewing about, if you're stewing about them.
How do you know what's the most painful, right? I mean, I can only imagine if you're in a logistics job or something like that, and you're always worried about this shipment, that shipment, and you haven't been really replaced by AI yet. How do you triage that stuff?
What's painful is what you're ruminating about. In other words, ruminations are fueled by the unpleasant emotion, by the difficult feelings that we have about them. One of those things is causing you more stress than others. And if it's like, because there are 3 of them coming at once and I haven't figured it out, then you actually need to sit down and figure out and prioritize and make decisions rather than keep those decisions, until the next day. Because if that's what's troubling you, then address it as best you can in that moment. In a pinch, another thing that works for our brain is if you say to yourself, I don't have time to deal with this now. I'm not at the office. I need to talk to 5 other people in order to figure this out. I am going to schedule time to get to the office 15 minutes earlier tomorrow with the full intention of starting my day by figuring this worrisome thing out so I don't have to worry about it tomorrow night. Our brain takes that kind of seriously. If you put it in your calendar and have the full intention to deal with it tomorrow, it will let go a little bit and allow you to disconnect from it in that moment. But the other thing you have to do after you disconnect is to reconnect to what the evening should actually be about. What are you trying to achieve? I mean, if you're trying to even if you're trying to veg out and watch a show, remind yourself why you like the show, set intentions that focus you in the right direction.
I feel like there's a deep introspection required for this sort of thing, which a lot of folks don't have time for ultimately. Is there any mindful meditation that you recommend? Is there something that you say, like 10 minutes before you walk in the door, you just do these things?
I will push back on the don't have time for. You are going to spend 2 hours at night, checked out and swirling in your head about all these things. You just wasted those 2 hours. So you have 15 minutes to say to whoever's around you, excuse me, I need 15 minutes to figure something out, or ask someone who's around you, can I just use you as a sounding board? I want to figure something out, and then I'll be able to be more present. We waste so much time in this way. Another way we waste time is when we're overwhelmed with all these things and we get to work the next day, we just put our head down and just go from task to task. We just get through this idea, I just have to get through the day. When we do that, we're on autopilot and we're very, very inefficient. So our mental skills, our creativity, our executive functioning, all our cognitive skills start to decline with fatigue throughout the day. And we're just trying to push through. So we're much less effective. We're much less efficient towards the latter part of that day. And if we actually were more thoughtful about taking care of these issues or taking actual restorative breaks, even if they're 2 to 3 or 5 minutes during certain parts of the day, we'd get much more done and save much more time. We are losing time on these psychological things, and it doesn't require deep reflection. It requires some reflection.
What a break?
A break can be 5 minutes between meetings in which you're actually doing something that kind of gives a reset to your brain. So if you've been sitting all day, or, then do some push-ups, run up and down some stairs. If you had a very conflictual meeting and you're all charged up, seek out a colleague to kind of be able to vent or get emotional support, or call a loved one who always makes you smile. Don't do the thing that most people do, which is check the scores on the sports, because some of those scores are going to upset you and not going to be a great thing. Or run to social media, because that's never a great thing either. That never makes us feel good. Neither does the news. So use 5 minutes to actually think about what would be recharging for me right now. What do I need? Maybe it's a walk around the block just to clear your head between things. That's what allows the apparatus, your mental apparatus, to kind of, cool down a bit and reset so it can be more effective in the meeting to come.
It's an odd question, but I think you'll have an interesting answer. Why should we even be worried about work to the degree that we are? Why should we maintain this specific psychological state? Why should we maintain this state of dread when we know it's detrimental to us? Why should I care? Well, why should I care how well this podcast goes, for example? I think that's a little philosophical, but I hope you understand where I'm going
It's
from.
not philosophical, it's psychological. You should care about this podcast because the podcast is about you. It represents you and your work, and you put a lot of effort into it and you invest a lot into it. And so it's very meaningful for you. It's a reflection of your work, of your thoughts, of the curation that you have in terms of your guests. It's a very personal thing. So you want it to succeed, you would feel bad because we feel attached to our work. We feel attached to our work product. We feel attached to our reputation. And another thing is our work is where we spend most of our time, not at home, not with our families, or even if we work from home, we're working most of the day. That's where most of our hours go. And work is the thing that actually allows us to fill most of our needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? This is where we get our shelter, our safety, our security, our food, our self-esteem. All of those things happen from work. So work is a major, major thing in our life. It's critical to us. And so the stakes are very, very high. When you lose your job, you might struggle to pay rent. You might lose status. You might lose friends. You might, there are all kinds of losses that come with it. The stakes of work are extremely high, and that's why we care about it. And lastly, our unconscious mind, which operates in the background all the time, it's not a self-organized, self-aware entity. It's just more about heuristics. But our unconscious mind thinks, this is where you spend most of your time. This is what you seem to care about it. And this must be the most important thing to you. So it is going to make you care. And then when that is threatened, it's going to create dread for you because this terribly important thing is being threatened.
What do we do when there is no work, right? When there's universal basic income and the robots are doing things for us and it's pie in the sky, right? 10 years from now, could be even 2 years from now.
Utopian or dystopian, what you just described?
That's the biggest question, right? Is it Brave New World where we're lounging around drinking our soma or whatever? Or is it dystopian where we're out of a job? How do we rewrite Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to that?
Well, because so first of all, here it's utopian in the sense that there's so many people who don't have basic income. So there will be billions of people that now will have basic income and won't have to at least deal with food insecurity or be unhoused or any of those things. Fine, so that part is terrific. The part that's really not so terrific is that if it absolves you of work, if that means that now you don't have to work, then what is your purpose? What is your meaning? Where do you get satisfaction from? Where do you point your creative, your competitive, your aspirational juices, as it were? So we are people who need to feel, most of us need to feel we're working towards certain goals. That's where the satisfaction comes, not from actually attaining goals, but working toward them is what the research tells us and our experience. That's the fun part is the journey. Or the exciting part is the journey. Once you get there, it's great for a moment, then there's a letdown. But then what are we aspiring to? What is it about for us? Either we'll have to completely redefine that in a certain way, and then people will always fill that void with, they will create something to compete about and something to aspire to and something that will redefine success for them in a different in a different way, because that's our basic nature. So we'll just find other ways of attaining those things.
So it's either the Hunger Games or I don't know, everybody's writing poetry to each other.
Again, but it'll be like poetry slams, will be like gladiatorial, bouts.
Oh, poetry bouts. Yeah. Right. I think this is helping people 100%. What else are you going to be working on? You've done quite a few books here, and I wanted to see what else you're thinking about.
Well, I mean, this book just came out, and this idea of how we can manage ourselves better in the workplace and outside of the workplace, to me, is going to be around for a while. How we'll deal with this uncertain, this constantly changing work climate. This is going to be with us. The uncertainty of it, AI and the impact of it, is going to be a moving target for a while. I tend to think, just because of my understanding of human nature, that once it becomes more ubiquitous, you will start to see all the revolt, all those people who are like, I refuse to talk to an agent, to an automated voice, I need a human, and suddenly there'll be now more select services that we only offer humans, for customer service or to help you with this or with that. I mean, there's always a pendulum swing one way or the other. So how things play out and what the, general marketplace adaptation to those things will be, and how as human beings we will adapt to those things psychologically and react to them psychologically individually and as groups, I think is where things are going to be very interesting over the next few years. And I want to be able to be nimble enough to respond to the responses in a way that can add value to people.
So guys like you are always going to have a job, because you're always going to be you're going to be telling the rest of us to
again. I think psychology is a bit threatened as one of those things, But I tend to think things as a wave. So, if you can surf that wave and be ahead of the thing, maybe you'll survive it.
Lovely. Mind Over Grind is the book. Available now. It's everywhere. And Guy Winch, PhD, is the person you're looking for. Guy, thank you for this. This has been super enlightening. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week. Back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Melissa Hanna. She's the CEO and co-founder of Mommy, MAHMEE, which is a fascinating startup. You guys work with doulas and you work with care during birth, right? So why don't you tell me about that? Welcome.
Thanks. Yes. Mommy provides wraparound prenatal and postpartum support. We do that with a team of doulas, lactation consultants, registered nurses, mental health providers, and nutritionists. And it's all included in one bundle that's actually covered by insurance. In most cases, we work with most major insurance companies, and the services start during pregnancy, go all the way through labor and delivery, and until baby's first birthday. So it's a pretty comprehensive package of support for new and expecting parents.
So, just tell me why you started this. What was the impetus?
Well, the business has been through a number of evolutions, but the impetus and the vision and mission have stayed true and consistent all the way through. We're on a mission to make the U.S. the best place in the world to give birth. Right now, the U.S. is not close to having that title. Mm-hmm. So it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, you could say, that we've taken on. We're not doing it alone. There are a lot of folks that are really passionate about this space. We work with a number of different health system and health plan partners and doctors, researchers across the country, and of course, a broad network of providers. But I started the business because I was hearing a lot about maternal and infant health statistics, the morbidity and the mortality rates in the United States. And I kept hearing numbers that just felt very wrong, like they could not be correct. And the U.S. is in last place with the worst maternal mortality and also an egregiously high infant mortality rate compared with all other developed first world, wealthy nations, however you want to describe that. We have the best tech, the best know-how, the most passion for providing healthcare to a diverse population. If you look at, just what the United States looks like and the resources we have to provide care to people, and to hear that moms and babies are being failed every day across the country was really shocking to me. And I thought that just can't be right. The more that I dug into it, the more I realized there was a real structural challenge in solving this. And it became more and more interesting to me. And I started pursuing it as a software problem, as a data problem. Could we connect the dots together to figure out why people are falling through the cracks of the system, why systems aren't talking to each other, why providers aren't talking to each other? Is this a communications issue? What kind of software tool set could help provide a better experience, both for the patients and the providers working in the space? And then learned over time that was not actually going to be the answer. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the story of a pivot.
Okay. That's so, and this is especially egregious here in the States for people of color as well, right?
Yeah.
I think I interviewed someone years ago about women's health, and she pointed out that was just abysmal.
Yeah, it is. It's true. Black women have on average rate of 3 to 4 times a higher rate of maternal mortality of death during or shortly after childbirth. This, and that's just the average. There are some communities where it is much higher than that, compared with peers with similar clinical profiles, similar economic profiles that are, and so, and that's the case also for Native American and Indigenous women as well. So these two populations really are off the charts in terms of mortality rates and morbidity rates, which is the rate of injury, where there could be a near-death situation or sort of a near miss where something could have gone wrong and luckily didn't happen, but there still was an injury that occurred. In all of these cases, it's really hard to talk about these stats without talking about systemic racism and bias in healthcare. That is a root cause of these disparities in care. What I found in doing this research over several years as I was building the tech company that Mommy started as was that there were a number of different contributing factors and that systemic racism and bias was an amplifier. Ultimately, high fragmentation, high fragmentation, and really a lack of proactive care, just like the dollars not being allocated to preventative care the way that we need them to be, were two of the other major drivers of this. So I started looking at this from the standpoint of, well, how do you solve for fragmentation? You start to think about information superhighways and information exchanges and connecting systems together, even if you can't necessarily connect the institutions together. And then when it comes to dollars being allocated toward more effective solutions, you think about payment innovation in healthcare and how do you actually redirect funding toward the solutions that have the greatest impact on the community.
So I think this is a really interesting point. I mean, what you said, and I want to hear about this pivot very specifically. The language that you used before for the first iteration was kind of language that I hear all the time from like an entrepreneur who wants to do something in like, I don't know, STEM toys or education. And it's very much like, we can do this. It's a software problem, right? And it sounds like you quickly discovered it wasn't a software problem. So tell me about that pivot.
Yeah. I wish I could say that I quickly discovered that
Okay.
because it's a little bit more painful than that. But I will say that this business being in the healthcare industry has had a different sort of profile and different time horizon than businesses in other verticals that are VC backed and sort of, you come to an idea, you put it in the market, maybe the first version doesn't work, you test it again, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is actually taking off. We did have that experience with our software solution. And I can talk about that in a second, but suffice to say that we saw growth within the software play that we originally developed. But what was happening behind the scenes is we started to understand that the market wasn't actually mature enough. The market wasn't established for scale. So even though we launched something and we did have that moment of like, oh, this is going to be big, when we started to see the development of that business, the signs were there, and they were small and they were sort of early because the market wasn't developed yet to say, this might not get as big as we want it to get. And that was the critical insight. So like I said, I wish that it would have happened sooner, but it took years really to understand first what the software problem was in the market. And I talk about the fragmentation and sort of like the payment challenge. I got emojis there. I don't know. Those are not
Yeah, that's not. It's a bad one. Yeah, okay, great.
But I just have to avoid talking with my hands too much. The software challenge was much more apparent because the United States has like so many different kinds of healthcare institutions and so many different ways that healthcare is paid for. That means there's a lot of different kinds of providers that can provide that care, whether those are retail providers taking cash pay, whether those are integrated delivery networks and large systems like the Kaisers and Geisingers of the world that have a much more integrated set of hospitals and doctors' offices and urgent care facilities and all of that, and plans associated with their brands. And then you have sort of your freestanding medical facilities of all different types, and you take your commercial insurance or you take your Medicaid insurance to these organizations, and you hope that insurance is going to pay for most of the care you receive. So there's like so many different ways that people get healthcare in the United States that we first had to figure out, could you build software that could connect these systems together? So we did that actually for the first 5 years of this company's life. And what we realized was that in order to find the missing data that would tell a different story and provide an opportunity to actually improve clinical outcomes within this population, we had to distribute software to a number of independent providers that really didn't have those tools yet. So we're talking about those doulas, those lactation consultants, mental health providers, nutritionists, nurses that are working in the communities. Often they're working in private practice or maybe even a local community center, a nonprofit with some grant funding, and providing those in-between moments of support between going to your OBGYN and your pediatrician's office for clinical care from your doctor, maybe your baby's doctor. There's all these other people you're talking to along the way. And a lot of those people had really important insights, but that data wasn't actually manifesting. It wasn't surfacing in the system. And so that was the key. That was the first insight was, okay, we have to get them online. We have to actually create tools for these kinds of providers. And we did. We created an electronic health record. We created a care management system, a communications tool set, a number of different features that allowed for these providers to provide care in the community. As sort of part and parcel with that, we realized, okay, now to figure out how to actually create more of that market, because a lot of the rich and valuable data was actually coming from these folks. You kind of tell your doula your life story, tell your lactation consultant, the aspects of, your experience that you might not feel comfortable talking about with your OBGYN. Even though we want you to feel comfortable talking with your OBGYN, it might not be happening. And so someone else might be getting that story. What can we do to empower that person with that key information about your health and well-being to be able to participate in improving your care? And so we had to find a way to actually fund these providers getting into the healthcare stack is what I call it, really getting them to be able to participate fully as players on that patient's team. So we had the tech for them. We had to figure out how to actually finance this. When we realized that the payments model for these types of providers was severely broken, that became a major blocker. We said, wait a minute, okay, there's all these people out here that can provide this care and have this really valuable insight and this really powerful way that they can have an impact in the industry, but they're not participating in the healthcare stack, and we can't seem to figure out how to get payments flowing to them because insurance wasn't covering a lot of these services. So the tough realization here was that being a pure software play was not going to maximize the impact, the ability to achieve the mission of the company, the valuation of the business, right? Because there was this blocker in terms of how these services are actually funded to allow for greater participation in healthcare. Otherwise, you've got, all these doctors, hospitals, all these folks that care about you and are providing care to you, but they're missing a piece of the pie over here. And these folks are just out of the system. We ultimately became a tech-enabled healthcare services provider. We took the tech that we had built initially and we started to employ those providers and actually build the scalable healthcare organization that had all of those independent, ancillary, wraparound service providers in-house. Because without that, we just had a market that wasn't scaling on its own. We had to become the scalable player. And now we have become that.
Did it ever get so frustrating that you just didn't want to continue?
There certainly have been moments. Yes. The mission is it's sort of like a well to drink from, to restore yourself, because as long as this continues to be an issue in the United States, for myself and for many others, certainly the folks in our company, and I think a lot of our peers across the industry, this is just something that people can't stand, they can't live with. And so, yeah, it's hard. It's hard building a startup, right? It's hard to build a startup in healthcare. It's hard to build a startup for women's healthcare. All of those things are true, but you look at the stats, you look at the economics of the industry. We're talking about $1 trillion market that is healthcare in the United States. Maternal and infant healthcare is approaching a $200 billion market. It's tracking to be on par with the size of the global video games industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
To an investor, it's like, well, you could back video games or you could back maternal healthcare. And a lot of people are like, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's part of the problem. And I feel like as long as I'm sitting in the seat I get to sit in and seeing the big opportunity from a clinical impact and also from a financial impact perspective, like, this is where I want to work. This is where I want to build. But yeah, definitely there are hard days where I think, gosh, when is this going to change en masse across the country, especially because there are opportunities globally to take these insights elsewhere too. But there's a lot of work to do here. And as such, there's a lot of value to build here.
What about investment? I mean, I've heard historically it's been difficult as a female founder to get investment. And then specifically talking about maternity, some dude in a vest on Sand Hill Road probably doesn't know a lot about that. So what did you have to do?
Well, I think it's a lot of reframing the opportunity so that people can find an access point into it. It seems big and far away. Someone else is having a not great healthcare experience in some other city, some other state, some other community that you're not a part of. And that can make it difficult for the value proposition to resonate with investors. Ultimately, I both had to learn how to reframe it for accessibility for those investors and also find the investors who it did immediately resonate with, that knew someone who had gone through an experience that could have been better and wondered why it wasn't, and find investors who had had their own personal experience that was not what they expected it to be and started asking their own questions about, like, why does it suck to have a baby in the United States right now? Like, this should not be happening. It shouldn't cost this much. It shouldn't feel this isolating, and it shouldn't be this medically difficult. There's so much risk associated with the care, lots of medical intervention that is not necessarily appropriate in every case. But in other cases, you're glad that there are people with, specialties that can save your life if that's what it comes to. But not every birth should be a life-saving instance of care. And so, a lot of people that I met along the way were asking those questions because they had experienced it or they knew someone who had experienced it themselves. I'd say that's a good portion of our cap table. Ultimately, though, we were able to bring in really strong investors from Sand Hill Road and from Wall Street and bring folks across the country to this work as the business was growing and demonstrating what it was capable of doing.
When you were building this, did you expect to be able to ship some software and then just have the business? Did you expect this along a thing? I mean, it sounds like when it's like trying to rebuild rehab a house or whatever, and then all of a sudden you find a bunch of like broken wood somewhere that you have to fix, right? So it sounds like you started digging and hit some rough spots.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think that I ever imagined it to be an overnight success. I did feel very confident, and I still do, that like technology is a very critical component in solving this problem. And that's why we're ultimately a heavily tech-enabled healthcare service provider. We develop software every day. There are things every day that we're doing to refine the operation and ask questions about how we provide a better patient experience, how we provide a better provider experience through technology itself, and through even connected devices that we use for remote patient monitoring. So, there's a number of different components to this that just continue to persist because the core thesis was right, but the market wasn't ready for it. Actually, you use the analogy of like sort of a house you buy and you find something's wrong with it. The analogy that resonates for me, the movie The Founder, I mean, sort of the Ray Kroc McDonald's story, like trying to sell milkshake machines and being like, this could be huge. This is a really great piece of tech and everyone should have it for their burger stand. And then, going out to try and sell to burger stands and realizing that none of them had the scale to need this, like, this great piece of equipment. It was just like not where their heads were at to buy that equipment. And then, him coming across the McDonald's, stand and being like, wow, okay, they've got something here. Like this could actually scale. Realizing that, you couldn't sell the piece of technology until you could find the business that could scale and use it and really, realize the value of it. That resonated when I watched that movie, because that's kind of how I felt going out there trying to like convince, your sort of onesie twosie doula lactation consultant outfits, like, you guys need to get online. Like you need to have a complete set of like, medical software tools to, book and schedule and communicate, have you guys heard of like HIPAA compliance? And they're like, what? And I'm like, you're going to be subject to, state and federal regulation soon enough. And I got laughed out of so many rooms. Because people were like, no, this is not where we're at. We're not going to need this. We fly under the radar of the rest of the healthcare industry. And I was like, but do you want to? Like, is that where you want to be? Because the care that wraparound service providers offer is so essential to the broader experience that new and expecting parents are having as consumers. And I was like, that's got to be like really valuable. And a lot of people were just like, yeah, no, I don't need your app. And what's interesting is I did find a lot of people who did, and we ended up having thousands and thousands of providers sign up across the country. We were in 44 states with providers using our software to provide care in their communities. And from a footprint, we were like, okay, geographically, like this is great. But from an actual like scale capacity standpoint, like each provider was taking care of like dozens, maybe 100 patients a year, right? So like each person kind of could only do so much on their own, even with a great piece of tech. And we were getting that feedback like, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing here. Yeah, it is right. It is nice to have these kinds of tools and the ability to book and schedule and pay, and, charge people and track my patient's care longitudinally over the course of their maternity episode. Oh, this sounds nice. And I'm loving using it for my 50 clients. And I'm like, 50 clients? There's like, almost 4 million babies born in the country every year. How are we going to actually get to scale? And we ultimately, this vertical integration, bringing people together and saying, well, maybe on an individual basis, y'all are doing the most. You're doing what you can, and it feels impactful. But what if we joined forces and created a team-based model of care? Then what happens? And the amplifier of that really is people are doing next what they were doing before. Each provider is able to do so much more. And the data is living this out. We're taking care of thousands and thousands of people a year because of this shift in operations. Ultimately, that's what we did.
Tell me a story about somebody whose life you changed because of this.
We get letters every day. We get emails, we get cards in the mail with baby photos. There's so many. There was a mom recently that this was a unique one in that we get a lot of like first time, I couldn't have done this without you. This was amazing. Thank you so much. First time parents. But it really strikes me, and it strikes the team when we get a message from someone who is not a first time parent, who has been through this before, and already has, is already carrying the burden of their previous experiences. And this was a young woman, early 20s, with a toddler who became pregnant in a very rural part of the state. There's like one hospital there, one doctor's office. And she found out about mommy being available through her insurance plan. And she didn't know what it was, but she told us that based on what happened to her the first time around and how difficult of a medical experience it was for her. And the pregnancy was otherwise pretty smooth, and she was very healthy and like very excited to be pregnant. But once she started to get into care, she felt so judged many times over. This was a woman of color who had said, I just didn't even know what to expect. But I had doctors asking, like, are you ready for this baby? Like, you're really young. And she was still in school, and she was just, she said she had no agency in her initial pregnancy experience. And the labor and delivery was very difficult, and she was in pain, and everyone was like, well, this is what happens when you get pregnant. Like, what did you think? It's, labor and delivery is not easy. She wanted medication. There was just a lot of bias that was creeping into this experience in a story that was an otherwise medically well patient. And this is not to say that anyone around her like wanted to make her feel bad, but in these high stress moments, and when patients are going through their own emotional and physiologic birth experience, like it can be a lot. And then people start saying stuff and they don't even realize sometimes what they're saying to you. I'm not going to defend her medical care team from her first pregnancy, but hearing this woman's story, it just sounded like people didn't know how to sort of control themselves as she's like screaming in pain there and being like, oh my God, the baby's coming. And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll go get the doctor for you. And just this attitude around it. The second time around, what she wrote in was to tell us that she didn't know how many places along the way between her pregnancy experience and her labor and delivery experience, and even in postpartum, she had agency. She didn't know that there were moments where she could say, hey, this is how I want it to go. Like, can we try this? Can we slow down here? Can you give me a second to do some deep breathing? What are my options for pain medication versus, sort of haranguing her for asking for any at all? She didn't even know necessarily what the different choices are. And it isn't just epidural or bust, right? There's a lot of different ways to manage pain. There's a lot of different junctures where a medical decision needs to be made. And if the patient isn't fully empowered and educated in what those decisions might be, the doctors and the nursing team will very quickly start to step in and sort of direct you toward those decisions. And so she wrote in, and her message was, I didn't know that there were moments where I could say no. I didn't know there were moments where I could just take a beat and participate in it and direct others around me. And this one was very powerful because it speaks to how outcomes actually do change, because there are people who have clinical risk. We take care of a very high-risk population, patients that come in with a history of diabetes, a history of hypertension, cardiac concerns, multiple high-risk pregnancies, right? These are stories where there's already going to be like a whole medical team around this patient. But we're talking about a young woman who has no other history, no other concern, but said, I was so terrified to get pregnant the second time. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like I want this baby, but I don't want to have to go through what I did before. Ultimately, that narrative is one that we love hearing because it talks about sort of the silent majority of what women are going through in this country, which is to say that if you don't have access to education, support, and provider or a team of providers like you get at Mommy who can empower you to be able to say no, to be able to know what your choices are and how to direct and participate in your own pregnancy and labor experience. There's a whole other storyline that may happen that may lead someone to say later, oh my gosh, that pregnancy was so difficult, or I really didn't enjoy labor and delivery, when it should be a wonderful and empowering and, exciting experience to meet your baby. So that's one where someone said, you changed my life. And what she meant when she said that was very clear that it wasn't just about that maternity experience. It was that someone for the first time in her life said, you have the power. You actually have the agency here, and you're in control of you, and you have a right to speak up for yourself. And it was my gosh, we were all moved by that.
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah. So thank you for this. This has been it's fascinating to see a move from like, I don't know, pure software play. I'm going to solve this thing. And then all of a sudden you realize there's so much to solve, and it comes down to just people, right?
Yeah, that's it. It ultimately comes down to how we care for each other. There are many different ways that people are addressing healthcare issues across the United States. I'm really excited about all of the ways that people are now imagining AI as a component of these solutions. We're doing that work as well. What we found is that it's always been, and it's always needed to be, the combination of people and tech. And so whatever that combination looks like as we go forward, it's that blend of the two, because caring for each other really is where you have transformative experiences where someone says, like, it only took one person. It only took one person being by my side to help transform the narrative for me. And everyone deserves that. And it shouldn't be something that's a luxury. It shouldn't be something you have to pay through the nose to get. And that's why I'm excited about what we're doing, because it's possible now to give this experience, to make this experience available to a lot more people.
Well, the service is called Mahmee, MAHMEE.com. Melissa, thank you for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
All right. This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.